Today's video is about looking up the same subject in the news this week and seeing how far back you can find a story. I didn't try really hard. Federal Express lost a nuclear medicine imaging scanner radioactive rod that was shipped for disposal and or recycling. And a Fox News medical contributor, Dr. Mark Siegel, said FedEx is lucky no one opened the metal nuclear medicine container called a pig in 2010. This happens all the time. There's a set of reasons for this, and I'll be going into it obviously, but again, the whole point of it is that it's allowed to be shipped through FedEx for two reasons. If some of you aren't aware of this, the primers for cartridges are technically, really they are an explosive. And most of the propellant has been given a waiver to not call it an explosive, but it's kind of an explosive. And these are shipped all the time, and most of you, well, some of you are going to have a big problem with it now that you know about it. Others don't want to talk about it because they don't want it restricting them because, you know, money and capitalism and guns. But anyway, hazardous items are shipped somehow, and unless it's a company that's only going to do hazardous shipping, which, if you think about it a little while, isn't actually a real requirement. It's not really necessary, and it would be a shitty business model. It would also be overly expensive. All you have to do on one end of it, instead of making it to where you have, like, you know, federal employees do all the shipping or something like that, that would be U.S. Postal Service. Instead of doing like that with ground shipping, you can allow anybody to do it by just making, as idiot-proof as possible, a container of something that people don't want to steal and don't want to fucking open. Oh, well, what about, yeah, every scenario you come up with is perfectly valid and is ignored, so let's talk about status quo. How do you make your own DIY nuclear medicine radioactive rod shipment pig? It's lead. It's the one-word answer, lead. If you're not aware of it, lead and a couple of other elements, but really just lead, has a peculiarity about it, makes it extremely good for this, as long as it's not something that's actually emitting heat at all, really, and is not emitting so much radiation that it would be an inordinately too big lead object. But here we go. You make a container out of lead with a lid on it that's lead, and there is no step two. I mean, you can make it better than that. I'm going to describe it, but that's literally it. It can be made entirely out of lead, technically, although that's not customarily what's done. So, I want to bring up, you might want to look up Firefox remove Google tracking add-ons and that sort of thing, because looking this kind of stuff up, I've already done it, so I'm screwed, is going to put you on a list. But FedEx.com's website talks about the checklist for shipping radioactive material and for specific purposes. Amazon.com, you can buy a nuclear radiation pig. It's an inert item. By definition, it has to be inert. That's the whole point of it being lead. And a couple of, 2 or 3 archives talking about it. Also, google.com/search, !Q equals nuclear plus medicine plus pig, ampersand UDM equals 2 is the new TBS hack thing to get pictures show up. All it shows is a bunch of containers that block radiation. Some of them are made for syringes, but they look like the toothpaste travel container you might have, or a humidor or something like that. So let me describe a procedure for making a nuclear radiation rod shipping pig, because again, it's not regulated. The one I found on Amazon, it's just the first one. It's not really representative of what you should use. Was about 3.5 inches long by 2 inches across. Okay, so you buy a steel 2-inch diameter pipe. Outer diameter has to be 2 inches. I'll put the number down below. It'll be listed as 1.5 inch or some other goofy number that doesn't relate, but let's say 2 inches are pretty close to it. And you get the 2 end caps. That's what I did. I don't know what size it said on it. What the pipe says it is and what its actual dimensions are don't have anything to do with each other. The 1-inch pipe is only 1 inch on the inner diameter. And yeah, there's some variations there. But you get the idea, right? So this would be less than a 2-inch pipe written down on it at Home Depot or whatever. It'll be like 1.5 inch. Anyway, you get the caps for it. Now, this is the procedure I used to make this work correctly. I got a second cap and drilled some pretty big holes in it, but one in the middle and then one off to the side with a tube on it that I stuck in there. Crank it shut, and this is very important. Get a threader to thread both ends to where the cap goes down as far as it can mechanically go. Extra points if you can use the gas tight or fuel tight fuel threading, which is a type of threading that soft forms the threads to be gas tight. Literally, that's what you want to do. That's what I did. But you don't have to. I'll explain why in a minute. Crank it down and make sure it only has the threads as far as it needs to. Unscrew it. Chemically strip everything to where it's nice and clean and, no grease on it. And then coat it with tinning flux for all the threaded surfaces and put it in an oven to quickly bake it to where it's tin coated. Tin plating is what you're supposed to use, but that'll work. And tin plate every freaking part. The tin makes the lead grab onto it. You want to do that. Once you do that, you also have to do that. Well, you don't do that to the one cap that you have a hole in. Crank it shut. Then pour in an ass ton of lead. We use lead fishing weights and lead diving weights that were melted down that we got from the boat ramp up the road. Pour it in. And I used a metal tube on it that allowed the lead to come up through the tube so it was totally filled. It will not really fully fill it, and you do it at that end. Okay? Then after that point, once you've got that done, you put the thing in a soft vise. Again, it's all tin plated by this point. The lead will have bonded to everything in it except that cap that you're now going to unscrew. And you're going to unscrew it and it's going to rip up some of the lead. That's fine. It doesn't matter. Then you go ahead and put on the normal one that you got tin plating for. Flip it over. Put it in an oven. Heat it to where the other end slumps down slightly. Or not. Then you're going to unscrew that one. Now, at that point, you've made most of this happen. Now, what you're going to do is you're going to cut off that end bit. Right now, you've slumped it down here. It's totally bonded all the way down in. You cut off the top real careful. Plunk. You have to use a hacksaw. And then you drill absolutely perfectly dead center. I had a lathe to do this on. We soft jawed it. You don't want the tin to be altered. It's very important. And drill a hole in it that's as big a diameter as possible till you have an inch of coating, an inch layer thick, or 3/4 inch or half inch, whatever it's called for. You want it to be as thick as possible of lead. More lead makes it heavier for shipping or storage, but makes it safer. As much lead as possible. And you drill out your hole to where it's the same thickness on the outside on all surfaces, and you go to the depth to where it almost but not quite touches the end. That's why it slumps down to that end. You need it very full, and the tin plating is to get rid of every air bubble so there's no excuses. And this has the effect of when you do that, unless you unscrew it on purpose, that is going to make it to where it can't unscrew. And even if you do take off the lid, it's got a lump of lead that's exposed. That's all. You're just covering it. When you get that done, and you cut off your top and drill out your hole, the lead you pull out, you turn it into a similar diameter sprue with some clay, pour that lead melted back into it to where you don't lose any lead. And you have a lead plug that's going to fill in the whole thing, and you screw it together and unscrew it a couple of times. And it's kind of backward stuck into the cap to where it has this profile where there's this plug going in, flat area, and then the metal, the steel on the outside. And you want to make sure there's a lot of threading to where you'd really have to try to unscrew it. That adds an extra layer of air gap. When you lift it up, that lead slug makes it to where your hand, which is almost what's going to happen all the time, is going to have a huge amount of lead stacked into it that fully fills in the bottom of it. Then, whatever depth you need to put in whatever you're transporting, you lop off the end of that lead bit, heat it up with a blowtorch or whatever to get it to the right shape. And then when you screw it in, it will create a gas-tight seal made from the lead. Also, again, extra points if you put on the threading, that creates a gas-tight seal because the threading on the steel, which has been tin-plated, is also gas-tight. And what it's doing is it's deforming, in some cases, the steel, but mostly just the tin. And now, how do we lock this together and how do we finish it up? For extra points, if you can get the metal, it's usually called a coupler, but if you can get the coupling metal that would go over it, get one of those, chop it to the length where it would have no gap to where the ends would be perfectly smooth on the outside. It would look neat. Grind out the threads if you have to. Coat the inside with tinning flux and the outside. Get rid of the zinc coating entirely. I forgot to mention that. And you slide that on, heat the whole thing up with your form in it. Just jam in a bunch of clay. That'll work fine. To where the tin solders everything shut. And extra points if you want to at that point. You can also drill into it and put in blind pins that you weld from the outside and then re-tin plate it. Anyway, the lid, when it comes off, acts as a cork that plugs into the dead space and pushes down on the top or bottom of the rod. Now, the ones that this was made for, this was for a college, had a steel piece on the back, and the rest of it was literally a lead holder with beryllium as a reflector or whatever, and a radioactive pellet in there that was within that made it to where when you put it in, you pointed it into the lead bucket, pig, and the back of it you would get with a magnet and pull it out. The radiation's always spewing from one end, so you'd lift it up out of the container, put it into the piece of equipment. Gravity requires that it be pointed straight down, and then that was your x-ray machine or whatever you were doing. Anyway, these lead pegs can be made any way you want to. There's not really any regulations other than how much lead lining minimum in the wall. Keep it consistent. 2, it has to have a steel exterior, preferably a neutral metal coating. Stainless steel is preferred. Doesn't have to be. It can also be just an exposed lead piece, but now it has extra shipping costs because it's literally lead. Lead is poisonous. By putting it in the steel thing, and then later on, there's a way of doing it, you chemically tin plate the lead to where there's no exposed lead anywhere. You end up with something that's massively over-designed to do this. You never make it any less than what's needed. No, there's not a lot of money in it. You can get one on Amazon for $70. They're available to the public. It's not the thingy, it's what's in the thingy that's regulated. But this kind of shipping is done all the time. You don't know about it. It doesn't emit any radiation, and it's over-designed. The one I'm telling you about is the extremely careful version from the rather cavalier cowboy days of nuclear medicine and nuclear equipment. The ones that have just a lid that plops in and it's loose-fitting, somebody apparently uses them, but I haven't seen any in a long time. I got to see one just before leaving Portland. The ones that have a screw fit on them also sometimes have a pull pin. It's sometimes called the grenade pin, where you can put through a really thin-walled, thin hasp lock to lock it shut so it can't unscrew. And extra points at the end. You can also just weld the end really quick, or you can make one that just has a disc of metal welded into the piece and just has threads on one end. There's hundreds of varieties. The ones off Amazon are purpose-built, and all they do is they make a really nice container, thin-walled, and then on the inside of it's got ridging in it to where it'll hold the lead, and then they just pour lead in it and push the shape in, and they mold these things like 50 a minute off of an assembly line once every few years when someone needs one. They're available all over the place because they're also used for something that just emits alpha rays, which really can't go deep, but they can screw up film, or they might mess up a piece of equipment. Or they're used to hold not something radioactive, but the sensor for it. They put it in there so it's not exposed to the radiation that you're all walking through right now. We're all bathing in radiation from the sun when it comes out, or just from space. So a detector that's oversensitive will almost always be transported in one of these things until it's put into the piece of equipment it needs to, just to get it to where it has the highest sensitivity and the longest life to it, because, I don't know if you know this, radiation sensors have a lifespan of sorts. So if you weren't aware of this, this is yet another dumb, stupid WAP tech trick. I know how to do kind of this stuff. And that was the old days, and I don't know if anybody even does this anymore. And yeah, I did this in such a way I was very safe. I didn't get lead poisoning, in spite of some people's opinion of me. And, anyway, 2010, they were fear-mongering about it, even though they're ridiculously clearly marked and usually have a lock on them. And FedEx does this all the time, and Fox News is about fear-mongering. So if you saw this story, remember this happens on average 3 times a year, and most of you didn't know that until today. I'm sorry. Some of them look like toothbrush holders. I think I'll get one just for that. Anyway, links below the description. Thanks for watching. Have a good day. Good luck with that. And you can look up how to make your own, although everybody does a much better method than I told you about. My method just looks funner. By the way, yes, it does end up looking like a bomb. It's designed to be very conspicuous. That was the point. Goodbye.